most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. When mindfulness embraces those we love, they will bloom like flowers. Thich Nhat Hanh. Today, we are here to engage and embrace the practice base for how we learn, supporting students' social, emotional, and academic development. I want to welcome everyone to today's event, including those who are with us live stream, to hear about what is not the typical 3 R's, but the ones that have the potential to lift our students so they can fulfill their potential. But you have to do your part today as well. You're going to need to be part of the release itself. Receive and reimagine this work. So release to receive, receive to reimagine. We will release the Council of Distinguished Educators consensus statements, the practice base for how we learn. We will receive best practices in the field that demonstrate that social, emotional, and academic development is how students learn. And we will reimagine the implications for the work of the Commission. So first, in your own preparation for the release of the CDE statements, we're going to release each of our stuck areas in order to gain freedom from the imprints and obstructions that are held in our bodies. We're going to do this by standing up and give yourself a little space. Tammy, do you mind?
Yes.
I want to get some assistance from one of our outstanding educators who led the social emotional learning work in Austin, Texas, and is still helping do this work in Atlanta, Georgia. Tammy Workman. So we do this by doing what we call arm swings. So I wasn't kidding when I say you need some space.
Okay.
Anyway, you won't be ready.
We take on too much responsibility that can make our shoulders feel like concrete, our bodies be kind of stuck. But we're going to unlock this, and I love Italy, so Italians believe the arms are the way to express the heart. So for those of you who want to really get into it. All right, so you're going to drop your arms like empty coat sleeves, and you're going to tip your hands down. And you're going to swing your arms around, letting your hands slap the side of your body. It's okay if it hits your kidneys, you're waking them up. And while you're doing that practice, you should be breathing in and out, releasing your mind for the day's task ahead. We're going to release, we're going to receive, and we're going to reimagine. Keep going. Mindfulness is about fully being present, being in tune to the moment. We're all pretty clear on what the research shows about the benefits of being mindful. Students who are taught mindfulness strategies can manage their emotions better, they can experience greater academic growth, and have sustained attention, which is cognitive control. Students who are mindful can also increase their working memory, which is an aspect of executive functioning. In fact, a recent study at Northeastern University indicated that those who practice mindfulness exhibit more compassion and empathy than those who do not. Mindfulness practices can help adults, like teachers, have a better sense of well-being, self-efficacy, and their ability to manage classroom behavior and maintain supportive relationships. This is all enhanced through a mindful life throughout their day. We're doing this exercise because we do this in our classrooms with our students. It's part of their daily SEL practice, tuning into the moment, tuning out stress in order to better receive the information their teachers, caregivers, and leaders are trying to do to enhance the learning experience. You can slow it down and drop your hands to your side. Have a seat. Today's release of the Council of Distinguished Educators consensus statements are part of the Aspen Institute's National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. It is an opportunity for us to release how we've been stuck in education. In the times we live, the diversity of thought over the last few decades on what education should and shouldn't be in our schools is quite different. And today you'll be challenged by the impressive group of diverse educators who are on the front lines of education and can help you make an impact in this work. In fact, this large group of people on the upcoming panel have helped determine how learning best happens. This work is tied to the greater work of the Aspen SEAD Commission, which will wrap up by the end of the year. But now we're going to highlight 5 key levers that can ensure our students are best prepared to be their best in college, career, and life, giving them options to really change the direction of where they may be going. As a proud SEAD commissioner and a member of the CDE, I think that it's particularly important that we are mindful of what you're being asked to do today. Again, release old notions, receive new information, and reimagine a future. Today's first panel is moderated by Dr. Sheldon Berman. He's the superintendent of Andover Public Schools in Andover, Massachusetts. They're going to delve into 5 core statements and practices that the panelists have tied to these statements. Shelley, I'm so proud to say, is a friend and a colleague who I admire. He's been a school superintendent for 24 years, and in dog years, that's like over 150 years, and that's how we kind of do this job. He served in Eugene, Oregon, Louisville, Kentucky, Massachusetts. He's been the president of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents. He has had so many awards, there are too many to list, but I'm particularly proud of him for being recognized by the American Association of School Administrators in 2011 as a courageous superintendent. So we're still so proud of you for that. He holds a doctorate from Harvard. He's authored books. He writes articles on everything from social responsibility to ethical leadership. I am so proud to hand over our first part of the morning, the panel presenting the practice base for how we learn. Chili.
Thank you, Maria. And welcome, everyone. This is an exciting event for all of us up here, and I'm sure the members of the Council of Distinguished Educators who are out in the audience as well as the Aspen staff. This has been a labor of love for a lot of us. We began about a year ago with 34 educators coming together with very diverse backgrounds. We were superintendents, we were social emotional learning coordinators, principals, teachers, a member of Teacher of the Year, individuals who had incredible experience in the classroom, as well as just leaders in their field. And we spent about a year talking about what is the core practices that make this work effective in classrooms. And you're going to hear a little bit of that today. There's a very rich experience that has gone into this report. And developing a consensus among educators is no easy task. So we debated a great deal and I think came to a sense of what is most valuable to pass on to those in the field to say this is how you can make a difference in to bring together and integrate social, emotional, and academic development and make that effective in classrooms. What we came to, and to synthesize some of this, is that we had an understanding that each of us brought some experience and some wisdom to the work we were doing, but it was the collective effort that actually brought out, I think, the 5 core areas, and you're going to hear about each of those in a couple of moments when I introduce the panel. But the fundamental understanding that we came to is that actually teaching, just like learning, is social and emotional. That you can't divide the two. That it is a core element of the practice, is the social emotional learning practice. That in essence, students need to be able to take risks. They need to be able to explore new terrain. They need to be able to make mistakes and yet feel comfortable and safe in those environments. And it's the conditions of a learning environment that are so critical to their success. So as we began looking at that practice, we began saying, how do we, in a variety of ways, make students feel acknowledged, known, supported, accepted, and create the kind of environment in our classrooms, in our schools, that best support their success. And how do we bring that into academics and integrate it into the academic curriculum? And what we realized is we were actually doing a lot of that. And we were already looking at ways that and practicing ways, as Maria led us in a little bit of an exercise, but even into the academic work that we do, and you'll hear more about that in a couple of minutes. The essential understanding is that to engage students, to have them fully engaged in the classroom and in the school means that they need to be part of that community. They need to feel that they're a member, that they have voice, and that their voice matters. And that's some of the core understanding that we came to as we began doing this work. Now, we have an incredible privilege here of having an extraordinary panel to share that work and to share the understandings that we came to. That's better. Thank you. Now that's better. One of the essential understandings and that we pose this at the very beginning of our report is that the work in academic and social emotional learning, when you look at the integration of those, takes real planning just as you would with any core curricular area. When you think about the sequencing of math or the sequencing of reading, we have to think about the same kind of consistency, the same kind of planning when we look at social emotional learning. And you're going to hear how the various puzzle pieces fit together. So I'm going to introduce our panel. It is an extraordinary panel. To my immediate right is Sydney Chafee, who is a Teacher of the Year, hails from Codman Academy in Boston. So wonderful place, wonderful school. Next to her is Ron Berger, who is the Chief Academic Officer was Expeditionary Learning, now it's EL Education, and has done really breakthrough work in this area. And to his right is Julia Sarmento, who is one of the authors of this report and is the Social Emotional Learning Coordinator for the Hillsborough Public Schools in Florida. And finally, on the far right is Jillian Ahrens, who's actually union president in Cleveland, a teacher, elementary teacher, and has brought just again, an extraordinary wisdom to the work. So what I'm going to do is ask each one of these to cover a particular area of the report and share a little bit more in depth, and then we will engage in a conversation about each one of these. So one of the first things that we realized is that social emotional learning is for all students, that it is about equity, and it is about bringing equity into the school and into the classroom. So Sydney, let me ask you to begin and tell us a little bit about what makes the classroom a place where all students succeed. How do we bring equity into this work?
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So for me, there are sort of two really important points here, and these are outlined in the document. So the first is this idea that we want to shift our focus from looking at individual students to looking at the learning environment. There's this great quote, and I think Oprah just recently said it as well, which really, boosted its profile. But, rather than asking a child what's wrong with you, asking what happened to you, right? So thinking about, this isn't about an individual kid coming in with problems that we then have to solve, but it's about thinking about how do we make sure that our schools are places where the environment is really set up to be optimal for all of our kids to learn. When we do that, when we shift that focus to the environment, all of our kids will benefit. All of our kids will be able to develop and grow. Sometimes there's this misconception that social, emotional, and academic development is only for certain kinds of kids, that it's only for kids who have experienced trauma, that it's only for kids who are coming from certain marginalized populations, but that's not true. Social, emotional, and academic development is something that every single kid needs. It's something that every single adult needs, right? So the fact that we started today by doing an activity in here and we're all adults, and I could actually see on people's faces that they thought it was a little funny, but it was also relaxing and helped us feel a little more comfortable. I know actually in doing that little activity, I found it easier to focus on Maria's words. So that's just proof right there that this is something that benefits all of our kids. So that's the first thing that's really important for us to remember. And then the second is, when we think about social, emotional, and academic development that way, when we think about it as something that helps all of our kids through setting up learning environments that are really conducive to kids' growth and development, we are also working towards equity. Because we're focusing on our kids as whole people and as individuals. And we're focusing on building relationships with them and getting to know them in ways that are going to help their growth and development. So in combination, for me, those two practices, it's about us ensuring that our schools fit our kids rather than demanding that our kids fit the mold of school. And I think that's just a really, really important shift. And that's something that I'm seeing. I get to travel this year all over the country. And I get to go to different schools and talk to lots of teachers. And this focus on the social and emotional and the integration of that with the academic is something that I'm seeing in every single school I visit this year. Every grade level, urban versus rural, charter versus traditional public, every kind of school I'm going into, there's this focus on social, emotional, and academic development. And this focus on thinking about how are we ensuring that our school fits our kids. So I'm going to tell you a few examples. I had to write them down because I got so excited, so I had to make sure I just really focused in. So here's one thing I'm seeing everywhere. And I saw this in my own classroom, and now that I'm traveling, I'm seeing it all over the place in different kinds of schools. This notion that within the classroom, teachers are building out spaces. And in my classroom, it was just a desk in the corner. In some classrooms, teachers are retrofitting coat closets. It's getting really wild. But there's this space in the classroom that kids have access to at any point where they can take themselves if they recognize that their emotions, that they're getting triggered or that they're elevated, or some kids will call it being in the red zone, right? They can take themselves to that space and they can make use of certain strategies and tools and resources there to regulate themselves. So for me, that's a really huge shift. In my classroom, when I introduced that technique of having this space in the room where a kid could choose to go, set a timer, and then use little tools there to bring themselves down so they could focus in on work, that changed the culture of the classroom. Because now it was about kids deciding that they needed a break rather than me saying, okay, you need to take a break, you need to step out. It became about meeting kids' needs rather than punishing kids because they couldn't meet my needs or the lesson's needs. So that's something I'm seeing all over the place. And what I love about that is it's available to all kids, right? So that's an equitable thing. And again, it's seeing our kids as individuals and letting them decide how they want to make use of this resource. So that's huge. I love that. And that can be done, in my school, we have something called the Peace Corner that starts all the way in kindergarten. I teach 9th grade and we have the break box. It's something that can be used at any level. What we're teaching our kids to do is identify their own emotions and then figure out how to regulate. So that's one strategy. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is a project that happens in my class, which I think shows this integration of the social and emotional with the academic really well. So we do a project in the 9th grade called the Letters to 9th Graders Project. And what this is at the end of the school year, every year, all of my 9th graders write a letter to next year's incoming class of 9th graders. And what they're doing is they're working on their writing skills, right? So they're crafting paragraphs and a thesis and all of that, but they're writing about their year and they're reflecting on what they learned over the course of the year, how they grew, what their advice is. So I love this as a way to integrate kids' real feelings and their reflections and their emotions and their metacognitive, thinking about what they've done over the course of the year with real academic skill building. And it's an equitable assignment because every single kid has access to what they need to get this assignment done. So no matter what kind of learner you are, you're going to get the support you need to do this. And we're going to value your words within the school community. So these letters get passed on to the next group of kids. They get passed around the school. All of the teachers read them. So again, it's about let's design an environment and let's design structures that enable all of our kids to succeed, that enable all of our kids to speak and grow and be valued. And let's make sure that we're seeing them as individuals and giving them what they need to do that. So I've got 1,000 more examples, but I'm gonna stop there. But basically, I love this part of the document because it really requires us to shift as adults how we're thinking about our job and how we're thinking about what school needs to look like and what the job of schools is.
Thank you, Sydney. Now, others on the panel, we all struggle with the issue of equity, and I'm curious about how have you worked equity into the work you're doing with social emotional learning in your practice as well?
Sure. So I teach first grade in Cleveland, and what Sydney said was really important, and I agree with a lot of the points she made, and really viewing equity as getting kids what they need. And one of the ways that we do that is by having, we have planning centers in Cleveland, which was really a shift for our schools away from like an in-school suspension model to creating safe spaces within a school for kids to have someone to go to. We find that often when kids feel alone or when kids feel like there's no one to express themselves to, that they bottle things up, and it can create a situation where the child feels there's no pathways or roads. And so by having a place within the school that the child can self-refer to, I agree, self-referrals are critical for kids to begin to identify their emotions and to begin to identify the way that they respond to situations. By having somewhere a child can go and know someone cares about them, and sometimes within an instructional lesson, it's difficult, and having a place where they can re-enter then in a calm space is absolutely critical. Within our classrooms, we also use strategies in SEL curriculum to help kids learn those tools they need to understand their emotions, to understand how to calm down and create a plan, and to really make learning joyful, to really make learning fun. And those types of interactions can help make sure that all kids get what they need.
And in our district, I think one of the things that we've done extremely well is that, and we've even talked about it in the document, is that we have to start with the adults first. You have to have those professional development trainings for your teachers, making sure that the adults understand what equity really is, what it looks like, and not just a piece of paper that says that every student should get one. It's different when you see it in action. And I think that our district has done a wonderful job. We created a whole department. We have a professional development team that really embraces what they're teaching. And we started with the adults. And I think with SEL and social emotional academic development, even in our document, we really do stress that you have to start with the adults first. So I think that that's something that our district did very well, is that we had to start with district leaders, teachers, and then put it into action with what it really looks like. So kind of like what Jillian said, but definitely start with the people who need to understand it the most first.
I guess I'll add one more thing on there, which is I completely agree. I'll say, as a white female teacher who's teaching 99% students of color who have a very different lived experience from me, it's really, really important that I think about my own development if I'm going to make sure that my classroom is an equitable place. And so I think that's absolutely true, is thinking about what work do the adults in our schools, of which, I don't want to be wrong here, but I think it's 80% of the teachers in our schools are white women. So how do we ensure that the adults in our schools are doing the kind of work that we need to do to be able to ensure equitable and culturally responsive environments for our kids? That's absolutely critical.
Ron, I don't know if you want to add something.
I'll just add a very quick story. Last week I was in one of our schools in New York City. It serves 100% low-income students, all of whom come from families for whom English is not the primary language. It's a school that's really successful. 100% of graduates since the school opened have gotten into college. And yet, when I went into a private room where the kids don't have access, the whole leadership team was there, and there was an entire wall of sort of a small poster of every kid in that school whom they worried about, who was marginalized, who was struggling, and there were stickers on there, a sticker for being homeless, a sticker for having limited English, a sticker for family trauma. And they were all discussing, how do we make sure none of these kids falls apart? They weren't worried about their great reputation. They were worried about, here are the kids in our building who are on the margins right now due to family issues, due to homelessness, due to special education needs that are so profound. And much of their time is spent on those kids to make sure every one of those kids is going to make it.
I think the framing is really important for the document itself, and framing this within the context of equity, it was important to all the members of the council. And you're sort of turning this on its head, Sydney, I think is the key point, that we need to look at the environment, that it isn't the child that's the problem, that we have to adjust the environment so that we're best supporting children, and how we support them, how we look at their needs, and our recrafting isn't about fixing the student, but it's about fixing the environment. So Ron, let me ask you, as a person who's in schools and classrooms helping the practice, we came to looking at the actual instructional practice around this work as entailing explicit instruction, embedded instruction, and actually building community. So say more about what that entails.
Sure, and I first have to say, I've known Sydney since she was a first-year teacher. I am so proud that she's National Teacher of the Year. I was just celebrating when I heard the news. It's great. Like Sydney, I spend a lot of my time traveling around the country speaking about social, emotional, and academic development and character. In the past 3 weeks, I've been in California, Louisiana, Kentucky, New York, and Kansas. Everybody understands this is important, but one of the things that I hear everywhere from schools and districts, and it doesn't matter if it's a red state or a blue state, is we know this is really important, but we can't actually do it. And there's two reasons. One is we don't have time. The pressures of high stakes assessments are so great, we can't really fit in social, emotional, and academic work. And secondly, it's too controversial where we are. And it's interesting, red state or blue state, doesn't matter. It could be too controversial. Here's what I say to audiences no matter what the state. You don't have a choice about this. Your students all day long are learning social, emotional, and academic skills. They're learning character, whether you want to or not. The experience of schooling is changing them. You might say, well, really, this is the purview of church or of families. Let me tell you, your students are with you more time than they spend in church, more time, many of them, than they have dedicated time with their families. And school is either going to make them more respectful, more responsible, courageous, compassionate, or less so. You don't have a choice at all about this. The only choice you have is, are you going to do this intentionally, purposefully, and well, or are you going to do it haphazardly and poorly? Like, it's already happening. Your school is developing kids now. So this is not a choice you can make as a district or as a school. So we're saying in this report, you need to be intentional about this. So first, you need to be explicit about it. You can have a poster when you walk into a school, and many schools have this poster that say respect, responsibility, courage, compassion. That poster means nothing if the hallways are not respectful and compassionate, if the lunchrooms are not, and if math class and English class is not. So we need to first make sure that teachers are equipped with the kind of tools and curriculum they need to be able to instill these kids in first graders and 10th graders, doesn't matter. There has to be explicit instruction about what does respect mean in math class? What does responsibility mean on the playground? Like, we have to have those conversations every day. And if teachers aren't ready for them, we need to give them the tools to be ready for them, to have those conversations every day. It can't be on Tuesday afternoons, just done by a health teacher. Right? This has to be all day long, every teacher being equipped to do it as explicit instruction. And it needs to be embedded as well. So it can't be that there's a time in the day that we talk about social and emotional skills. It's when you're in English class and you have to be split into groups, and I come into Sydney's class and kids are meeting, kids need to be respectful and thoughtful and compassionate for each other's ideas. They need, and if they're not, and I've seen Sydney do this, she stops the class and they have a conversation about what respect and responsibility means in our English class. So it needs to be explicit skills taught outside the regular curriculum, and it needs to be embedded in the curriculum so that in English class, in math class, if kids are being less than their best selves, you stop that class and you have that conversation about being respectful even when kids are struggling academically, cognitively, emotionally. You have that conversation in class. That's where kids learn to be. And this is even trickier because it's the hardest work I do. You need to have that conversation in staff meetings when staff are being less than respectful and inclusive of everyone in those meetings. because staff are going to be the model for that. In the end, as Shelley said, this is all about community. I've known Shelley also for 30 years, and Shelley has had one message really for the world, which is the right message, which is it's really about the community and culture that you enter. Because when you enter a school culture, a faculty culture, and a student culture that pushes you to be a certain way, you change who you are to be in that culture. And it's not where you come from, it's the community you enter. So our schools need to be a community where when kids enter, they think, I have to be a different way in this school. That's what this school values. It's not about one particular lesson, one particular framework. It's about the culture that shepherds you as a student or as a teacher toward caring and focusing on these issues. So we need to build school communities where when new kids enter, they feel like in my old school I could be a jerk, in this school that's not okay. We need to have schools where teachers enter and they think in my old school people were often not collaborative, not supporting each other, not supporting kids' development. In this school that doesn't fit. In this school we work together. So it's really a culture and community change in the building. So we're saying it needs to be explicit, it needs to be embedded, and it needs to be part of a community. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Can anyone jump in and add to Ron's statement?
I would just add, a lot of times there's classrooms set up to do like group work, and teachers may think, oh, my kids do group work, so they have to get along, so they're doing SEL. And while it must be embedded within what you're doing, if we don't take the opportunity to explicitly teach those skills, we're just assuming that our children have those skills and know how to use them. And in many cases, that may or may not be the case. And so finding time within a lesson to truly have kids practice how to manage emotions, practice how to be a friend, practice these things in a safe environment gives them the ability to use those skills when they need to use them on their own, as well as when they're in groups. But it goes beyond just the traditional thinking of how kids learn to get along with one another.
And I would just add that the key word in what Jillian just said is assumption. Like, we assume that our students are coming in with some of these skills, and then we get upset with them because they don't know how to work in a group together, or they start arguing and they don't know how to resolve the conflict within their group. That is the perfect time to teach that skill. Stop assuming that our kids are coming in with all of these great, wonderful things that we're assuming someone else did. Stop assuming it, and if you see it happening in your classroom, if you see it happening in your hallways, take the time and be intentional about teaching those skills, because they're skills and they have to be practiced. It is a skill to sit and listen to someone when you don't necessarily agree what's coming out of their mouth. It is a skill to sit there and just kind of, okay, but listen, instead of already thinking about what your response is going to be. That is something that is taught. Someone taught us that skill, and we need to do the same thing for our students. And I think just stopping the assuming and then just being intentional about it is just extremely important for this work.
You all are doing a really good job sitting and listening right now.
Yes.
Something that Ron said resonated for me. So he said, our kids need to know that when they come into our schools, there are certain ways that they're supposed to behave and that they're supposed to treat people, right? When we do this really well, when we embed this, and when it's not, oh, well, here's SEL time, they do learn exactly what everyone has been saying, that this isn't just what we do in school. This is sort of how we operate. Last May, I had this great example of this. I'll try to tell this story as quickly as I can. My kids put on a play every year. It's the most painful process I have ever been through to get 45 15-year-olds to do a play. It's not optional. And on the night of the play, it's if you want to talk about social and emotional turmoil, it's like this up here, right? So last May, we'd been doing all this SEL work that Ron is referencing in my class, in my school, and things started to completely fall apart backstage. The kids were, yelling at each other. There were tears. People were stomping around. It was horrible. The play was supposed to go on in 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden, before I could step in and do the teacher thing and fix it, the kids started to actually put into practice all of this social and emotional learning, all of these skills that we'd been working on all year, and it was magical. So they started to take care of each other. Somebody gave somebody else a drink of water and was like, you need to drink, you're dehydrated, that's why you're upset. Someone else sat a kid in a chair and they put headphones in his ears and said, listen to this song, it's gonna calm you down. Somebody else got a pep talk, and they were all caring for each other in these ways that we hope that they will. And I hadn't prompted them to do that. They realized in that moment, oh, like this is the time that we need to do all those things that we always practice. And it was natural and it was real and it was amazing. When we embed this stuff, that's what happens. Like our kids just, they learn how to do it and they learn why it's good and useful. And yeah.
Can I say one more thing, Shai? I also want to point out that it's not a trade-off that one has to focus on academics or on social, emotional, and character. Mm-hmm. So let me just say every single graduate of Sydney School has gotten into college. Even though it's about 100% low-income students, since the school opened. A mile from here, there's another school in the EL Education Network that was the focus of the first case study of the commission, Capital City Public Charter School. 100% of graduates of that school have gotten into college since the school opened. These are schools that are focusing deeply on social emotional skills and character, and at the same time, they're beating the odds in terms of success academically. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other to focus. They're synergistic in the way that when you focus on character and social emotional skills, kids get the skills to be able to succeed academically as well. So these things, it's a false choice, I think, that districts and schools feel they're making.
And I want to be, now I'm in a district that's, you might say, is a more affluent district than the ones I've been in before. And it's not just for the students who are in low-income districts. This is as critical for all students as it is for any individual student. And one of the themes that's emerged from the conversation we've just had is that this is a complex array of components that we put together, that it is important that we teach the skills directly, that students understand the skills. And there's a naturalness to your play, to the work we do in classrooms that embeds this in the very work we're doing, whether it's teaching kids how to work in a group, whether it's having kids discuss math problems and figuring out math solutions and learning how to cooperate around that, whether it's looking at science investigations and how we teach hypothesizing and thinking through and being patient and understanding that we may not know the answer and have to be patient and explore, or whether it's in social studies or English where we're looking at individuals, or literature where the character of either historical character or a character in literature, that we're looking at their social and emotional development. There's a whole variety of avenues. But the one thing, and to come back to, Ron, your original point about community, sometime, and this is what happened in your play, that we need to turn it over to the kids. That it's giving them the ownership for the conditions of the classroom, that they are equal parts. When I taught, and I taught high school, we had all my students, write the rules of the classroom at the very beginning. And then they held each other responsible for those rules. It's the kind of a little bit of democracy that works in a direct way in the classroom, but a way of giving them more voice, giving them a sense that this is their community. They own this too. And they're all a part of making this work, and they're all responsible. But schools can't do it alone, and they also need support, as Julian pointed out, from adults. Jillian, as you look at the work with adults, and one of the key themes that came out of this report is that we have to actually start with adults. And as a leader of adults in your community, tell us a little bit more about how we effectively implement this practice with adults.
Absolutely. Students' social, emotional, and academic learning necessarily has to involve adults in a school setting, because the adults are actually setting that model day in and day out. Our kids are paying attention to what we're doing, whether we are aware or not, whether we intend what we're doing or not. They absorb what the adults around them are doing, and they pay attention to language. They pay attention to consistency, among how kids are treated within a classroom. And making sure adults understand their role in implementing SEL practices within their classrooms is critical. Adults model that SEL in their interactions day in and day out. And one of the key pieces in this work is acknowledging that the adults may need themselves to practice some of these skills as well. It is critical that we look at how we support teachers. Teaching can be a lonely field. Teaching has the potential to be a field where there's lots of pressure. And we have to help teachers deal and learn their own strategies to manage their emotions. We have piloted in Cleveland some mindfulness and yoga practices in the morning for our staff members to help them enter the classroom in a calm manner, to be able to set that example for how their students enter the classroom. And it's critical that we see SEED practices as not one more thing to do, but how we do all the things. Sometimes teaching can have do this today, do this today, do this today compliance. It's compliance driven, and you have the pressure of the high stakes tests, and teachers pour their heart and souls into their classrooms to make sure the kids that are in front of them are successful, and making sure they understand that SEED can be the driver in how to raise academic achievement is critical. Adults can help kids and help one another build relationships so that our kids feel safe, to create places of belonging, and to make sure that we are able to collaborate both with our students and with other adults within a school. And at the end of the day, the adult part of SEL can help tap in to why most of us became teachers. Most of us became teachers to help kids, and because of that spark, that joy, and of seeing a child succeed, of seeing a child learn, and the SEL practices can help build more and more of those moments within. In implementing SEL strategies, we've been working in Cleveland for about 10 years on trying to implement, and oftentimes I may speak to, let's say, a high school teacher who says, I teach math, not feelings, I'm not doing this. And so having those courageous conversations with professionals to say, this can help you with your math instruction because your kids will be more attentive, your kids will enjoy the learning, your kids will be involved, and you can actually get them more engaged and to get to that more rigorous environment. But helping our adults understand how it is a benefit is critical. Educators need to see their role in the implementation of SEED. They need to understand that it's not a one and done PD that sits on the shelf for the rest of the year, that they can see how they can impact their children, how they can impact their classroom, and how it can be different. And it can bring back that spark into the classroom. If they don't see their voice, if they don't see their vision, it can be more difficult. And so I encourage people to make sure you have teacher voice when planning implementation. Make sure you listen to what the adults need to help support their children, and make sure that they are a part of those conversations to how this will help their classrooms. I have helped negotiate a contract where we put social emotional learning into our collective bargaining agreement. Not all states have collective bargaining. Not all states have those opportunities. But we as a union believed that SEL functioning was as bread and butter to a contract as wages and healthcare. We believed that this has such impact for our students that we needed to negotiate it and put it into a contract. And we believe even without a bargaining unit, the power of having a teacher voice there to say, this could help, this could be there. And then that helps build buy-in with other staff members When someone across the hall is finding success, when someone across the hall says, yeah, this is good, this is helping my kids, wow, look at what's happening, how my kids are interacting differently with one another. That type of success with SEED and that type of engagement with the adults can propel how it's implemented within your school and within the adults. Because if it's one thing if you watch a video from somewhere across the country, it's another if my friend Julia is using it, and I know Julia. And so it really helps build those connections among the adults and can drive that professional development and to get those supports and resources. One of the key things when we planned implementation was we didn't want to just have teachers be trained. We wanted to make sure secretaries had some type of training, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, security. We needed to involve all different types of adults that interact with kids because, as I said at the beginning, kids pay attention. And if it's one thing in a classroom and then you go to the office and they aren't speaking the same language and they're not using the same strategies, it can throw off the ability to really hit the levels of implementation we want. And so while the training was different for the other adults within our district, it was just as critical so that everyone that engages with kids understands that we're really developing those skills within the students that they need to help be successful moving forward.
Thank you. I think one of the unique things about this panel is that we all have been involved in professional development in some way. And so I know that, Julia, this is key to your work as well.
And I think going right back to you need to start with the adults on campus. You need to start with every adult, just like Jillian was saying. And just to be brief, you can't just have one professional development at the beginning of the year and say, okay, we did our SEL training for the year. And we're done with that. It has to be ongoing, and we need to teach our teachers the skills that if they're struggling in one of the competencies, that it's not seen as a negative thing. Like, that's what we're here for. We're here to help guide our teachers. For one of the trainings that we just had last week in our district was about self-care and understanding that it's not selfish and that you need to take that time for you and find those different strategies to help you. Because if you're okay and you're doing and you're feeling good about yourself, then you're going to be that much better for your colleagues. You're going to be that much better for your students. You're going to be a better educator. You're just going to be a better person all the way around. But if we're not intentional about the delivery of what professional development opportunities we're giving to our teachers and then following up with it and making sure that they have what they need, then they're not going to be doing what's right for our kids. If we want our students to practice these skills, our teachers need to be practicing them as well. And I remember when we were developing and crafting this document, we spent a lot of time talking about that piece and making sure that the adults on campus that are delivering this to our students, and that means the secretary, the bus driver, whoever has that interaction with our students, that we're taking care of them and giving them the training that they need as well.
Sydney or Ron, do you want to add anything?
I'll share a brief story. I work with about 160 schools. Some of them, like Sydney's, are ones that we help to start from scratch, but many of them are existing schools, not always doing so well when we begin that partnership. And I agreed to work with a school that was one of the lowest performing in its state, and it was a dangerous place physically and emotionally for kids and faculty, frankly. And when I met with them, they said, kids can't behave in this school because of the challenging homes they come from. And after we sat down as a group, I said, let's talk about the faculty. So 3 days in the summer, we began to have a talk about how much do you trust and respect each other as a faculty. Within a half an hour, teachers were crying, and some teachers were losing their tempers with each other. And they had been living in a toxic environment of mistrust across race, across primary language, across positional authority in the building. It was a disrespectful, toxic place for adults. It was no wonder that kids didn't grow in this building. And we had to spend days together starting to build a commitment as a faculty to start working together and trusting each other to build the kind of community that Shelley talks about before we could even get into it. Because the student culture of the building is never ahead of the faculty culture in the building. Like the faculty culture sets the limit for it. And if your faculty culture is not trusting and inclusive and respectful, you can't expect students to be that way.
Co-signed.
Well, I'll share just a little bit of a personal experience. When I was teaching, I actually left teaching to start an organization called Educators for Social Responsibility. And it was focused on teaching conflict resolution skills to students and to adults to try to begin this practice. Now, that was in 1981, a long time ago. And as I taught these conflict resolution workshops, I realized how terrible I was at conflict resolution. So it took me stopping and saying, am I practicing what I'm preaching? Am I really listening carefully? Am I finding common ground between differences? Am I facilitating this in a way that I change as well as the other person changes? This becomes a highly personal work. This is personal work, and it's important that the opportunities that everyone here in their work shares with when they work with others is that this is personal, and it's about who we are as individuals and who we represent in the classroom, and it's a vital piece of this work, and that's why we started with adults and felt that it's critical that we spend the time with adults, not only learning how to teach these skills, but actually reflecting on how do we represent these skills in our own practice with students and our own lives.
Definitely.
So, Julia, one of the experiences that emerged from the discussions that we've had is that we can't do it alone, that partnerships are critical. And it's more than just the practice in schools.
No, and I think this part of the document, it kind of like brings it all together, that we all have to be speaking the same language. We all have to have voice in when we're making decisions about social and emotional and academic development with our students. So making sure that districts, that we're communicating what we're doing with our parents and letting our parents have a voice in the decision-making process. Not telling, so parents don't feel like we're telling you how to parent your child, or this is what you should be doing to be a better parent. It's more about, these are the skills that we're teaching our young people in our schools, and this is how it could be beneficial at home as well. And then when parents come in, if we're using the strategy of, sitting in a circle and having a community building or a morning meeting, that we're practicing that same thing when our parents come onto campus, that we're making our parents feel like they are a part of the community, and that the school is seen as a safe place for everyone to come. And as far as our partnerships, that we're listening to our partners that are working in this field, and the school counselors, and even partnerships that are in the communities that are already working in this, that we're bringing them into the school districts, and that we're listening to their expertise as well, and that we're all working together to build and craft what we want for our students, and that it's not just the school district taking on, this is what we're going to do now. It's giving everyone that piece and listening to every voice, and then partnering with like community, the service learning project piece, that our students can actually put what we've been teaching into action. And even in the news now, we see where some students are taking action. They are taking what they have been learning, and they're having a voice, and they're speaking out there, and they're working, and they're building their own nonprofit organizations while they're in school. They're speaking up for what they want and what they believe, and that's ultimately what we want with all of with SEED. That is the ultimate goal, in my opinion, is that what we have been teaching our students in the classroom, what we have been modeling for them, they're going out and they're doing this. They're doing this work. They're becoming better people. They're becoming better citizens. And in our district, one of our vision is preparing students for life. There is no better way to prepare a student for life than to have one of your graduates go out there and become a decision maker and become a policy maker, and really put some of this stuff into action. And I think you cannot do this work well without everyone having a voice, from the school district, from your partnerships, and allowing your parents to also come in and be a part of the decision-making process.
Others want to add to about your experience with partnerships?
I'll just say that we have worked on creating parent professional development, inviting our parents in and explaining to them the strategies we use, ways to help children breathe, ways to help them calm down, the steps. That way they are aware and that way they understand when children come home and are practicing. And the other thing that it's really been critical is even in our like weekly newsletters, we usually let our parents know, the ELA skills we're working on this week, the math skills, but we also let them know the social emotional skills that we are working on. That way the parents can help practice and reinforce those skills at home just as much as so they understand that when they're home, those don't just go away. They have to practice them at home as well.
Yes.
It's critical.
Sydney, Ron, any want to add? Well, one thing that I will say about the partnerships is that the after-school programs that we have, the volunteers that come into school, all are critical to the success of our students. And one of the things that emerged very strongly in our conversations is that this does represent our community. In a larger sense, it's not just the school, it's the whole community that surrounds the student. And if we can actually bring some consistency across the various organizational boundaries that exist, that we all work together towards one common goal, and it ends up being a much more productive, much more consistent for children and their experience. So the last category is leadership, and I guess I was left with that one. And there's some key themes about leadership that emerged in our conversations as best practice, as things that were absolutely critical to communicate. And the first one was that leadership is critical. That Maria Kastarfin, who's a brilliant superintendent, articulates this with her whole staff on a regular basis. It's that kind of leadership. It's the articulation of a vision from leaders, that this is not something that they're going to ignore, but something that they're going to put up front and see as critical. And the other role that leaders have is building it into policy. And those policies are the vision statements of the district, the goal statements, the strategic plans. I know when I started this work in Hudson, Massachusetts, we came up with a mission statement that read, "Our goal is to promote the intellectual, ethical, and civic and social development of students through a challenging instructional program and caring classroom and school environments." Now that embedded the work in the essential statement of the district, the essential mission of the district. And when I went to Louisville and Jefferson County Public Schools, we embedded it there again in a Care for Kids program that became a comprehensive way of managing classrooms and managing the school. In Andover now, we have 4 core goals, one of which is social emotional development. So it is the leader who says this is important enough that we have to build it in a strategic way, and we have to make it clear that this is a priority for the district. But it goes beyond that, and it actually says, how are we then going to implement it? And can we demonstrate to others or to our staff, to our community, that it's important enough that we're going to dedicate resources to leadership? And it is having leadership. Julia is a great example of having leadership in a district, a designated person whose responsibility is to carry the banner for social emotional learning, to ensure that it is built into the math program, to the science program, to all the other academic programs, and that it is of equal status. That teacher leadership is critical, and I know that Jillian, I'm sure that in Cleveland there are many teacher leaders who support this work and become model teachers in their classrooms, or exemplary teachers where other teachers visit or offer professional development. And that the final thing about leadership is that we need to monitor progress, that it isn't just about articulating this, but it's about saying, how are we doing? There are many surveys that have emerged, or I know Pam ran education. There's a number of others that have emerged in the last number of years, where we actually can look at the culture and climate of our schools and judge how we're doing in creating that kind of caring classroom environment and caring school environment. Now we have to be cautious because, in a sense, these instruments are not ready for accountability. They're not about accountability, and I often feel very reserved about labeling students based on these assessments. We're not at that state yet, but we can use them to monitor progress. We can step back and say, how are we doing in the culture and climate of our schools? What does it tell us about student engagement? What does it tell us about student safety? But most important, what does it tell us about student sense of connectedness to each other, to the school, to adults, so that we can refine that work? So what you've heard in the panel articulate is sort of 5 core elements, and these are the understandings as we've tried to distill them down to some essential practice points for other schools to use. And I hope that this has been helpful in illustrating those 5 core elements. The one of equity, that we start with adults, that it takes partnership, that it's about explicit embedded instruction as well as building community, and that leadership is really key. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I think we'll open it up to questions.
Yes, there may be some questions about that. We have a few minutes, and we also want to give you a chance to have a small break. So please stand up, introduce yourself if you have a question for the panel. Yes, ladies first.
Wait, I'm gonna bring you a mic so everyone on the live stream can hear you.
Kaylin Tucker, the National Association of Elementary School Principals. Thanks so much for this enlightening work. I think it'll be really helpful to school leaders. And on that point, could you speak to the preparation process that especially early career principals can take from this document and getting themselves up to speed? I hear from new principals all the time that they are very interested in this area and recognize that it's an important aspect that they need to cultivate in their schools, but they may not have gotten this type of training in their preparation and their university training, district training. What needs to happen on the early end so that school leaders can do this important work?
Well, one of the things, I'm going to look to the panel here to answer this, but one of the things that we discovered as we were doing this work was how it is not addressed in pre-service programs for teachers or in administrative preparation programs. So it is important that we do this work.
And I would just say that it's even, since we're seeing that it's not coming at that level, that maybe as a district that you're taking the initiative and saying, whatever new teacher orientation program or process that you have, that you're incorporating it into that piece, and that so before an administrator comes on board and that onboarding process or a teacher comes in, they're getting that from your district, and that your district is saying this is important to us, this is what it is, and that there's a clear understanding of what social emotional academic development is, because sometimes you'll hear that it's just about your feeling, SEL is all feelings and hugging and all that, when it's so much more than that. And the document goes through so many ways of how to explain that, but also just having that including it in that onboarding process at the district level, or even at your school level.
Ron, you do a good deal of work with principals.
Being a principal is a lonely job. Let me just say, it's hard to be a principal because there's no one else in the building with your responsibility. In addition to training, we feel like principals have to be a part of a cohort where they have ongoing support from colleagues who are other principals, where they get together and they can talk about not just their training, but the crises they're having in their building, with staff conflict, with student conflict, with parent issues. They need support. And so principals shouldn't be out this all alone. They shouldn't feel like I'm the only one in my building with this. They should have a group of people that they can call on the phone. That our principals text each other, they call each other, they meet with each other, they go out for a beer after work. I mean, they get together so that they can say, I'm having a hard time right now. Like, this is a crisis in our community due to this, and I feel like principals shouldn't be alone in this work.
Let's try to get another question in. I saw a second hand.
David Osher, American Institutes for Research. I'm also a member of the Council of Distinguished Scientists that relate to the Commission. I think we always should start and end with practitioners. I wonder, and the report is great, having scanned it during the presentation, I wonder how you see the relationship between this report and the consensus statement that was released by the Council of Distinguished Researchers.
Well, frankly, we modeled everything off of that report. So, you know, as the scientists or the researchers broke the ice on this one in a really powerful way, you know, the themes there are that obviously social, emotional, and academic development matter, and that they're malleable, that you know, this happens over a period of time. So it isn't just that you can intervene just with young children, you can intervene at any point, and that schools are a critical part of that. So we looked at the research, we built off of the research. You know, the research document is a very powerful start for any school district. It's a way for, whether it's a superintendent or whether it's a principal, to take this to the faculty and say, this is important work, and this is what the research tells us. And then to say, and by the way, there's a document here that tells us about practice and how to implement that research and make it real. Those two documents are, I think, companion documents. And I know that the commission's working on a parent document and a youth document, and I think to have this sort of full spectrum of perspectives brought to bear on this work is going to be critically important for schools and districts as they look for how to proceed and how to implement this work.
Is there anyone else? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Dan Brown. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher. Thanks so much for this report, Aspen Institute. This is excellent work. I wanted to ask something that's kind of like bothering me as an elephant, because this work is so important, and I personally agree so much with the values espoused in terms of, you know, making sure that every child feels that they have, you know, a chance to be heard and to express themselves and have access to a great shot in life. And when we take this out of the school sandbox, and I think there's a direct link in other issues with these values of access to housing, healthcare, fair wages, you know, it's a progressive agenda. And in this, you know, political moment where we are in March 2018, those issues of access to healthcare for everyone, access to living wages, access to housing, these are all aggressively opposed by Republicans. To what extent can we in education who are doing this work should, or where is it happening to make these larger alliances to push forward these values that we are talking about today about every child having a fair shot? Briefly, I taught at the Seed School in DC, which is a great school, 100% low income and 100% get into four-year colleges, but only about a third graduate. And I think that's triple the average for low-income students, but it's still, students are not quite, we're not quite there, because I think we're living in this segregated society where there's a constant assault outside the schoolhouse on students' chances at life. So there's great work happening inside the schoolhouse, and all of this work is so crucial. To what extent can we bridge it outside, and how can we be change agents for that?
You know, I'm going to try to answer some of that, but I think each of us may have an insight. That's a pretty important question. When I began the work in Hudson, Massachusetts, Hudson was a predominantly Republican community. The lieutenant governor at the time, who later became governor, was a Republican. There was as much of a priority for this work among Republicans as there were among Democrats. There was a sense of, you know, people care about character. They care about kids being good kids, good people, and they understand that this is a vehicle not as a necessarily a progressive agenda, but as a healthy, you know, constructive agenda. I've thought a lot about when I was a social studies teacher, And one of the things I cringe at now, as I think back on my teaching, is that some of the strategies I used were debates. I was a high school social studies teacher. We had debates about all these topics. And what I learned about the debates is it only really confirmed the opinion you started with. So you got to know why that was even right and why the other side was even more wrong than you thought originally. I wish that we had actually converted that, and I had converted it to dialogues where we were trying to find common ground. One of the things that we can do is we can reconstruct in the work that we're doing here, reconstruct the connections between people, the listening that people do to each other, the problem solving that we do together. And what we are teaching is a problem solving strategy. You know, it's not conflict resolution. When you teach conflict resolution, it isn't just about let's all find a share, or let's find a way to be with each other where we'll tolerate our differences. It's how do we solve the problems that we're facing? And so I think it's absolutely critical, and I happen to believe that there are many in this country who look at our politics right now and see the kind of fragmentation that has occurred and the polarization, and are actually saying we need to find ways that we solve problems, even if we have differences about those solutions, and find common ground to move forward. So I think we're doing that work, and it's not political work, but it is deeply political work in the sense that we're forming the base of what our democratic society should be about, which is that we have problems, we have to listen to each other, figure out common solutions, and find common ground to move forward. And I think in a way, it steps out of the polarized political spectrum. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on.
I would just want to affirm. I spent a lot of my year working in Alabama, and I start every talk by saying, look, I'm an old white guy from New England. There's a lot that we're different about. I mean, I say I root for the Patriots, and then they all boo, right? I mean, but I also support a progressive agenda. But this is not about a progressive agenda, and this is not a partisan issue. This is about what every one of you wants for your kids. And so even though I do support the progressive broader agenda that you're describing so well, this is not something that needs to be partisan in any way. It doesn't matter whether folks are in Alabama or in New York where I'm working. Every kid, whether their parents are African American or Latino or white or Asian American, whether they're Republican or Democrat, every kid wants their child to be respectful, responsible, courageous, compassionate. We all want this, and we all want schools to imbue that in kids. And so we can put our partisan agendas aside to come together on this. I really believe that, and part of, for me, is just being right out front about my agenda. I do have a progressive agenda, and that's not what this is. This is what we all want for our kids.
And
I would
just
just-
as
Yeah.
a black woman from Alabama, I would like to just reiterate that. I think it is critical that we don't attach this to a political agenda. If we really want our kids to have a whole child development experience so they feel safe, welcome, and respected in schools, it starts from us as the educators and the people who need to be the advocates around this work, explaining that it is good for humanity.
Right.
And if we're not talking in those terms, I don't think we're doing a good job, and that this information would not be released, received, or reimagined. So thank you,
Thank
Ron.
you,
I
Mary.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say exactly what Maria said. It's what's right for kids. It's what's right for people. So I just ending it on that it's whatever side, it's just doing what's right for our students.
And that is a great place to stop, unless I want to give Shelley the last
No,
word, if
you're
there's
fine.
anything else. Otherwise, we do need to wrap up this panel, give everyone an opportunity for a quick break, and we will be back to talk about practice-based implications at 10:30. Thank you. So here's what I need to do. Where is she?
Where's Moria? I need you to ask her. Does she want? He wants to introduce his own panel. Ask her if she wants to meet you. She's in the white jacket. Hey, okay, I didn't realize like no one, I didn't know, like, I thought there was like a pre thing. It's nothing showed on live stream, like,
At the Action Forum.
How you doing?
A couple years
That's
ago.
right.
All right. Okay. So, welcome back, everyone. Again, we're here with the Aspen Institute and the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning. Please follow us on Twitter at Aspen Institute or Aspen SEAD, hashtag SEAD. Please share with the world your thoughts and comments on today's event. We are here talking about the practice base for how we learn, supporting students' social, emotional, and academic development. Again, this is an opportunity for us to practice some of these exercises that we do with students. We're about to start our next panel, but we've invited back up the council or members of the Distinguished Educators Commissions Council, and they are going to lead you on the next exercise. As we discussed earlier, we are releasing, receiving, and reimagining. So please stand. And this is going to be an opportunity for you to check for your understanding, but also kind of reiterate what you heard. So each of you will be standing with your arms at your side. And I'm asking our first panel to restate the 5 core statements that we just discussed on the panel quickly as we begin the receiving process. So here we go. It's called Arms Open to the Sky. You're going to stand with your feet about a shoulder width apart. You're going to hold your arms at your sides about 6 inches from your body with your palms out. Your elbows are going to be relaxed. Just kind of let them drop down. And every time you inhale, you're going to gently let your arms float up until they form a wide funnel for receiving. And fingertips are going to be pointing at the sky. And we're going to do it 5 times. And so I'm going to let the panel... We're going to get ready. The first core statement. Okay, relax your arms and let's receive. Social, emotional, and academic development is for everyone. 2.
Social, emotional, and academic development needs to be explicit, embedded, and rooted in community.
Inhale.
Start with the adults.
Homeschool community partnerships matter. And our last one, inhale.
Leadership is pivotal.
All right. Let yourself embrace this space, this data. Open and welcome the new energy of this thinking. Mindfulness is, again, so important for us to stay connected. When we're trying to receive new information and be receptive to the words, you have to be receptive with your whole body. We say to kids, when you listen, how do you listen first? What do most people use? Work with me. Ears. But you also can listen with what? Your eyes. And then you can also listen with what? Your heart. And so we're asking people to be full listeners today. And so our next panel is going to be led by one of the greatest thinkers in education, Ellen Moyer. She is the founder and executive officer of the New Teacher Center, a national nonprofit dedicated to improving student learning by accelerating the effectiveness of new teachers, experienced teachers, and school leaders. The National Teacher Center works in high poverty schools to ensure that the nation's most underserved children do get the highest quality education. She is recognized around the world as a passionate advocate for teachers and students and the students they teach. She has an extensive experience and background in public education, having previously served as the director of teacher education at the University of California in Santa Cruz. She's also worked as a bilingual teacher. She has numerous awards for her work, including the 2015 Mary O'Brien Award for Excellence in Expanding the Evidence-Based Practice of Social and Emotional Learning. Welcome, Ellen, and our panel. They will introduce themselves. They're going to share their insights into seeing
the practice base in action. In other words, implementation. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate that introduction a lot. And I want to thank the Commission and Aspen Institute for all the work that you all have been doing. I have to admit, I've been around a long time, and I'm impressed. We're making progress. I'd like to have each of our panel members introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. We'll start with you, Sonia.
Great. Well, good morning. My name is Sonia Stewart. I am currently a high school principal in Metro Nashville Public Schools. I serve a community of about 750 kids, serving the highest poverty population in our city. I've been there for 6 years. This is my 21st year in education. I was a high school math teacher. We were talking about, I got my teaching start and actually teaching end in Los Angeles Unified. Been all over the country, Jacksonville, Miami, Chicago, doing work around education and education reform. My heart is to serve kids and families in under-resourced communities around education in this country. It's what I've done for 21 years in lots of different seats, and it's what I'll continue to do. So happy to be here.
Thanks. Thank you for serving the youth of LA. I am John Dacey, and I've been working in public education for 35 years. Teacher, high school principal in a number of areas, and a superintendent in a number of areas, including across the river here in Prince George's County and Los Angeles Unified, tiny district on the West Coast. And since I retired, I have put a great deal of energy into two things. One is supporting leaders in this work, but also really thinking deeply about the kind of horror of the American criminal justice work. And so founded and opened an alternative prison in Oakland for men 18 to 25, and I'm working in that field. And it's great to be here. And you're right, this is very impressive, Ellen.
Good morning. My name is Chris Poulis. I'm a Spanish teacher and instructional leader for the humanities at Joe Barlow High School in Reading, Connecticut. I'm also honored to be the 2007 Connecticut Teacher of the Year. I'm an NBCT. And we've been doing quite a bit of work with the integration of social and emotional learning at our school and making a lot of progress. Another hat I wear is I serve on the board of directors for the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, which is an organization committed to engaging all teachers in best practices and in advocacy for best policies. And so we find it very timely that this social emotional learning work is at the forefront, and that organization, the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, is working hard to spread the best practices and policies associated with the work.
And I'm Leticia Guzman Ingram. I'm also a high school teacher. I teach English as a second language and film as literature in Basalt, Colorado, is right in the Rocky Mountains. I'm also honored to be the 2016 Colorado Teacher of the Year, and nice. I am a national commissioner with the Aspen Institute on Social Emotional Learning. So I'm excited, I'm psyched actually to be here.
Whoa, can you believe the talent on this panel? And can you believe the talent on the panel before this panel?
Yeah.
I mean, if you combine all the talent from the two panels, I think that's a statement for how important the work is that we're doing today. Now, I want to take you back a ways to say that my work has always been about teacher development, really thinking carefully about not only how you recruit talent, but how you develop early career teachers. And at the heart of my thinking and our work has always been about equity, social justice, relationship building, rigor, access, and caring. And for a long time in America, I had to keep those values quiet. John and I have been at this a long time. I didn't keep it so quiet. But it wasn't popular to talk about relationships. That meant you were a softie. That meant you really weren't about rigor. And I want to say to all of us today, those of you in the room and those of you that are watching, that relationships, empathy, integrity, caring can go with standards, college and career-ready opportunities, access, and rigor. And the more we link those together, the more we're going to create a better society, better individuals. We're in the people business. We're in the developing people, whether it's students or adults. That's our core work. And so to integrate social, emotional, and academic together is at the heart of a better society. When I was invited to join the commission, I was like, I was honored. And I was like, one more time, building a set of ideas, building some documents, putting them on the shelf. Okay, I've been around a long time, so I was a little cynical, but I was also honored. And I'm not getting anything from saying this to all of you, but this is some of the most important work I've been involved in my career. To get 34, 35 educators to agree to the practice base for how we learn is not easy. To get a group of scientists together to come to a consensus on how we learn is not easy. And now our job, all of us now, is to come up with a set of recommendations in the end of the day that educators across America, whether it's school district leaders, site principals, teachers, or community members, we have an opportunity to drive change across America. And in response to one of the questions earlier, we're never going to have all of us together on the same page. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try hard, fight for social justice and equity, and drive for access for all kids in this country. My final 2 points I want to say to you is, I'm actually here because a teacher made a huge difference in my life. And I'm just this passionate, driven person for our profession, for teachers, for teaching, for school leaders, for education. As Shelley said, as the democracy of our public education is really the democracy for America. And I think that social, emotional, and academic development is actually a way to transform the profession, to create better conditions for teachers, and to create better conditions for principals, and to create better conditions, most importantly, for kids. So I'm excited to have this panel, and I'm going to push each of these panelists. They're all doing brilliant work. They've done brilliant work across their careers. We're over 160 some odd years in education, if you add up all the total here. We're like going to kick the ball out of the park. You guys ready? All right, let's get going. So Sonia, let's start with you. And we're going to also address the pillars, but we're going to like drill down on, well, what's it really look like in practice? Like we're going to get at not the what, but the how. How do you do it? So we've had a chance through the commission to actually see Sonia's school in operation, and I want you to be able to share for us this idea, Sonia, that we have to start with adults, right? Yeah. And we want to not just start with a few adults, you want the whole building to be engaged. So based on your experience, how can districts and schools really build the capacity of adults to do this type of work well?
Yeah. I really love that question. I think one of the things that was really clear coming out of the first panel was this idea that kids need to grow and be in schools where they feel like they belong, right? That sense of belonging. You heard that, I think, from 2 or 3 different panelists. I can't agree more, and I think that we need to be as focused on building a sense of belonging with the adults in the building, and I love that language, this idea of belonging. The other thing that came out of the first panel that I think is critical for adults as well is the idea of joy, and I think one of the things Shelley said when we were together in January, he used the word delight, and that has stuck with me over the last couple of months. Adults need to feel like they belong and that they experience joy and delight in their work. So how does that happen? In our organization, we get at that really 3 different ways. One is on connected teams. It's really important that adults feel connected to each other in the work. So we do that we're in an academy structure, a career academy structure. They have common planning on A days. We have an AB block. All those teachers, 18 to 20 teachers that serve the same 250 to 300 kids every day, they meet once a week together in a connected team. We also have department teams, and they meet together as well. But I think what's been really transformative at Pearl that I think is unique, my school's named Pearl Cone, so that's really unique, is that we've also built what we call, we're the Firebirds, and we call them flocks. And what it is it's a group of 8 to 10 teachers across academies that meet and function as like a community circle throughout the entire year. And this construct came from my teachers. They said, we want to spend more time in each other's classrooms, we want to give each other feedback, we want to know what's happening across the building, and we want to spend time together. And I said, great, how do we want to make that happen? Every faculty meeting, they're sitting in their flocks. We started the school year in flocks. Now think about what we're doing. We started the school year with team building with my teachers. We did an amazing race at the beginning of the year this year at Pearl Cone, where they had to go throughout our zip code. They had to go to all of the schools, all of the rec centers. They sat in living rooms of our communities. They had to eat in our zip code. All of these things within flocks. We're building capacity within a team. We're building trust. We can always put teachers in these constructs, but unless they build relationship with each other and trust each other, there's limitations to those relationships. So we push, just like we do with our kids, to help them build relationships in an accelerated fashion in the beginning of our school year. We do the same thing with our teachers, help them build those relationships. So one is connected teacher teams. The second part of that is there does have to be some training. So we do a lot of that. All of our teachers have been trained in culturally responsive teaching. All of our teachers have been trained in trauma-informed classroom. All of our teachers have been trained in mindset and mindfulness. That's a part of what we do, tools in their toolbox. And then I think the third thing that I would point out is that we have to actually practice these skills, and we practice them a lot. So in our faculty meeting every week, or every month, we have faculty meetings once a month, we sit in our flocks and we practice an SEL skill. Last month we did active listening, which is exactly what Maria was talking about. All of our faculty were taking our kids through an active listening practice, so we set them up to do the same thing. And this is what it was. They had to pair up, and for 4 minutes, they had to talk. One of them had to talk about a prompt. Our prompt was, when do you feel unheard? And we had to talk to the other person for 4 minutes, and that person couldn't interrupt. They had to attune to them. And then after that, after the 4 minutes, that person for 2 minutes had to summarize what they heard. No opinions, no commentary. I heard you say this, that, and the other. If you couldn't talk for 4 minutes, you had to sit in silence, because it's really hard to do. And then we switched. And then after that happened, we talked to each other. How did that feel? Some loved it. They loved that somebody was listening to them for 4 minutes. Others felt horrified by the fact that they had to talk for 4 minutes. Some people enjoyed the listening. Some people enjoyed the talking. But we do something like that. We've done breathing exercises where we're sitting back to back. Every single faculty meeting, we take our faculty through a practice, much like we've done here, that they are going to then have to roll out with their kids. Literally, intentionally practicing very specific skills with our teachers.
Would any of the others of you like to comment on adults first? Really, adults being engaged?
Well, I think one of the great things that our school started doing was exactly something like that. Once a month, we started doing yoga or some kind of sport in the gym. It's kind of crazy because you have everybody, and we have one teacher that wears a kilt all the time, so it's really funny to see him in a kilt and tennis shoes and, you know, playing volleyball or doing yoga on the floor. And anyway, I won't say that. I'm live, I better not say anything else. Anyway, it's just great because it brings you together. It builds that relationship. And I think it was Ron that was talking about how you need that relationship between your teachers first in order to model it for your students.
Well, I think that's right. And really what we're seeing is you're trying to build a culture, a community, the flocks that you're talking about. That helps teachers feel connected, interconnected, wanting to come to school, being able to know that they have a cohort that they can work directly with. So it's, as we think about starting with adults, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, Chris, how do teachers have so much on their plate? And we're so good at pouring more on their plate. We're really kind of good at like saying, and then once they get it, that bumper sticker's over, and then we go to a new one. Now, how do you think about this, Chris? Like, how do teachers find the time to actually integrate social emotional competencies and skills into their academic lessons and their work?
Thanks for that question. There's no doubt with any school initiative, teachers are going to feel overwhelmed because there's new things to learn and new things to do. And I'll speak broadly as to how we at Joe Barlow High School address that with our SEED initiative first, and then I'll get a little bit more specific. Broadly, principal promotes an environment of collaboration. That is critical because when people work together in teams, effective teams, and they collaborate, they feel more productive, the work is more efficient, people's strengths compensate for other people's areas where they can grow, and the work gets done with much more quality. We have in our SEED initiative the EQUATE, EQ8. So there's 6 teachers and a principal and an assistant principal that form this group. And we work to strategically plan and action plan our initiative and think of ways to bring it to scale. It's a collegial inquiry. And throughout that collegial inquiry, there is much collaboration with research, exploration, and implementation. Another broad area that supports bringing down those feelings of feeling overwhelmed is finding ways to create time in the day to collaborate, amongst other things. And it's a win-win because the principal and the assistant principal cannot implement the initiative solely. They have too much on their plates. And the teachers really, who are knowledgeable about the SEED initiative, want the autonomy to be able to go out, to learn, to be able to stay in the classroom, but also have the ability to go out and interact with colleagues from different districts who are doing similar things and learn and bring back. They want the time to be able to, if they have a skill, one of the skills of a team member of ours is grant writing, the time to actually write the grants to fund the initiatives. And so time is critical. Also in the broad sense, there has to be a mindset that the initiative is not a quick initiative, that there's a long trajectory for the SEED initiative, and that in our district, we're putting 2 years into the teacher piece, into the faculty piece, to getting them on board. And we're thinking a little bit about implementing with students and with parents and community. But if there's a mindset that this is not something that has to get done with urgency, that we're in for the long haul, people feel less overwhelmed. More specifically to those 3 points, there are 3 things I'll share that we're doing. The members of the EQUATE, I said there's a principal, an assistant principal, and 6 teachers from different disciplines. Every teacher in Connecticut has to write a student learning objective as part of our evaluation systems. And so what we've done on the EQUATE is write student learning objectives that involve social and emotional learning. We measure emotional intelligence of students, and we look at academic performance, and we've invested our year of evaluation, and we've tied it to SEL. A little dangerous because we don't know what's going to happen, but the trade-off is that there is time built in the academic calendar for teachers to collect data for their student learning objectives, to collaborate with other teachers, to get feedback from administrators, and to receive professional learning. So we gained all that time that's already set aside in our schedule by weaving the SEL through our student learning objectives. Another thing we've done that has really helped to bring down the feelings of being overwhelmed is we have a science partner. We're lucky we're in Connecticut, we're close to New Haven, and so we work closely with the Yale School for Emotional Intelligence in the development of our program. Cool. Members from that Center for Emotional Intelligence come to our school. We've had 4 or 5 visits. They meet with the EQUATE, they help us plan, they help us forge a path forward. When we need a diagnostic tool to measure emotional intelligence, instead of spending time and looking for it and not knowing if it's the right one, they listen to our needs and they provide that for us. So that's a huge time saver. They convene schools from across the state to have conversations and share about best practices and policies so that we can more efficiently implement. The science partner is critical. And finally, the third thing is that we are looking at what we already do that integrates SEL. So back in 2014, we went through an accreditation process in our district. As a part of that process, we had to develop or reevaluate our school-wide learning expectations. And it was a teacher process. The teachers sat around and talked about what the expectations were. And those conversations were distilled into 3 rubrics: a community rubric, a complexity rubric, and a communication rubric. And what we found, and this was not intentional, but more recently we looked at those rubrics, and the language of social and emotional learning is woven throughout the indicators of those rubrics. So teachers embrace them. They consider the learning expectations when they write curriculum, when they plan instruction, and when they develop assessments. And so now we're at a point, and we say to the teachers that when we're building our staff up for this initiative to say, you know, that was a great lesson, and look at what you did. And it's often the taught curriculum, not the written curriculum, where the SEL is present. So we're working to formalize the taught curriculum into the written curriculum. We're redoing our curriculum documents, and we're saying, but you're really doing SEL. And we know that when it's formalized, it's more purposefully implemented, and it serves our children better. So those are 3 specific things that we're doing that really reduce the pressure and the urgency and the feelings of overwhelmment that teachers have.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. You know, I'm just kind of tease out a few things that we heard earlier as well, right? First thing you said, I think, was we need to have a principal who understands, leadership team who understands how to build collaboration across the school. So I think that's really critical. Then you also bring up what I heard Jillian and Julia and Sydney saying on the panel earlier, which is we need teacher voice. Like a lot of, not some of the things that we do in schools and in districts comes across to teachers as sort of a mandate or a top-down approach, as opposed to really sort of engaging them in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Another thing I heard you say that I really want to put a pin in and not forget as we move throughout the panel is you're exploring something. There's an inquiry that you're engaged in together, right? It's not a mandate, and there's curiosity. I'd actually say there's probably joy, and there's some delight in it. So it's bringing out the goodness of people. And I think that kind of approach is really important as we think about this work together. I'm going to change to a little different area. I'm going to push John on all the great years you've had and as a superintendent, leading school districts, your work as a principal. Like, we really need to do a better job of engaging partners, families, and communities. And I remember before I even knew you, when you were a superintendent in Santa Monica and you passed the bond initiative, I'm like, wow, that guy, he did something pretty amazing. So how have you engaged, and what can we do to really push this agenda with parents and community members?
Yeah, thank you. I think a couple of things. One is, I don't think it's any big news flash about the kind of current context of the America today and how that shows up on our school door every single day. So we're watching a very fractured period of time, one marked by tremendous amounts of uncivil discourse, lots of examples of hate language. And I think, kind of very struck by what you said, Sonia, is I think students watch us every single day. And parents desperately watch us every single day. And so when we talk about engagement, it is hard. It has been historically very difficult to engage parents on issues of accountability. And it's been very difficult to engage parents and guardians around issues of curriculum. I don't know of anything easier to engage communities and parents on than this work. I think it is the absolute open door opportunity. With that being said, I mean, I think a lot of engagement historically has been what you won't do in schools and what you will do in schools, as opposed to what we could do together for, quite frankly, your child. And so I think that framework fits beautifully with this work. I mean, students want to come to school and show up as their whole self and not show up in any way that creates an opportunity to be either less than or worried or diminished or exceptionalized. And so those, in so many ways, are the seeds of respect. And I think perfect opportunities to model both civil discourse and true partnership by talking about the social and emotional and academic development of the next generation of people who are going to take care of us and lead us. I want a very healthy person, total, respected human being taking care of me in my old age. And I want that person teaching my grandchildren and leading my community. And I would like them also to be able to apply the skills they learn in school and be a productive member of society. I don't believe that's going to happen and have a more healing society than the one we have at the moment, unless they actually were mindful of this. Having leaders and teachers who are the most trusted first-line person a parent looks to. I mean, we can have all the bulletins we want and all the kind of posters we want in school. Parents look to teachers just like students look to the adults in the school for guidance around that. What I think is critical is that this not become a new set of tasks for the adults inside the system, but maybe I would like to say honoring what they have always done best, which is be stand-up, responsible, engaging individuals who are given both the time and the respect and honor about leading these forms of engagement. And then I think the same goes for communities as well. Schools aren't in isolation. School systems are probably the last intact social institution we have in the country. People look to us to lead in this work, and I think we can rightly accept that responsibility and engage with communities. I think when we open the door through this avenue first, I think the other very important issues that we want to talk about will come along as well. And I'll just close by, yes, is public education under-resourced for the expectations that we rightfully have? There's like no kidding about that. In an area where it's profoundly under-resourced, I think is dealing with this issue, but particularly mental health, whole health, and responsible health of the young people in the school, inside their community. I think this is a way that we can bring that forward and talk about the responsibility of our communities to step up in this area.
That's great, thanks. I've been thinking a lot about this area because it's really about about doing what parents actually send their kids to school for.
Yeah.
Right? Like I can always remember our son's 33. I remember when he went down those steps to kindergarten. All I really cared about was that someone knew him well, someone could guide him along, that someone was his teacher was going to be teaching him how to be empathetic, that he was going to be able to learn. I mean, every parent, I don't care what race, background, socioeconomic level, we heard that in the panel earlier, that's really what we care about. And I think John's point that it's not something new, but let's get explicit about what we've known forever. Like we all got into this profession for this exact reason, to make a difference in the lives of kids. So let's tease this out in a way that just reminds people that it is sort of our core mission and in our DNA of what we're trying to do. Leticia, it's easy for people to think, and we heard this in the panel just earlier, that social, emotional, academic development is just for those kids. Look, it's for all kids. It's for every human being in America in education. And how do we start to think about, from your perspective as a teacher and as a teacher of the year, how do we create more inclusive and positive climates where every child can succeed?
I think that's what we have to remember, that it's not that social and emotional learning is not just for those kids that are high risk or those kids. I teach in the morning, all my students are from another country. And so sometimes you think it's only for them because they came from countries that were very violent, and they're coming here because it's a safe place for them. And so, all my students, like I said, they come from these countries, and I want them to feel safe. And I make sure that my classroom, like they talked about in the earlier panel, is safe and feels like they belong, and it's warm, and it has plants, and it even smells good when you come in, and has music, and it's a happy place for all my kids. The biggest compliment is at lunch when it's crowded with all kinds of kids that come in just for they're stressed out, and it's really cool. Like Sydney was saying, they come and they use my essential oils and have it all over on their temples. They're rubbing each other's temples, and it's really great to see that.
I thought that was only in Santa Cruz. Oh, sorry.
It's also in Colorado. But it's great to see that, and the signs are in English and Spanish because most of my students come from Spanish-speaking countries, and so it's great. But I feel like in order to make it where everyone, because it's not just one type of kid that needs to belong, like you said, you want every kid to feel, everyone wants to belong. You want to belong. I want to belong. We don't want to feel like we're out of the circle. And one of the coolest things that my district did, and in fact it happened last week, was they invited the community partnerships that you were talking about. So we had like 100 businesses, which is a lot for our little town, and the whole district brought busloads of kids there, and they got to meet the community business professionals, and they were saying, you know what, I'm here for you. I will help you. Come intern with me. This summer, I'm here. I can help you with your capstone. If you want to come work for me in the summer, sign up here. And it was so beautiful to see that, to see the community partnering and the kids. So it's not just the job of the teachers to teach the kids. It's the whole community. We're the tribe. We need to work together. We need to collaborate together. And it was so fun to see my students, like the Latino radio station was there, and the other kids were like, oh, cool. They were saying, 107.1, I'm from Basalt High School. And it was just so fun to see everybody working there. Aspen Institute had a booth there. And it was just, the kids were like, I didn't even know, that Aspen Institute had a, center in Aspen. Who would have known, right? Anyway, it was just great to see that partnership. And the kids are not alone. We're here for each other. And I feel like that's what we need to do. We need to work together. We need to embrace each other. That art center in my local town, they called me up and they said, you know what, we realized that none of your kids have ever taken an art class here. We want to change that. So they said, can you come in twice a week and bring your kids? So I got my little bus license, and when I drove them over there, we went twice a week and took lessons. The kids could barely speak English when they first started. And 6 weeks later, they were really quiet and shy. 6 weeks later, the business next door had to come over and tell them to turn down their El Salvadorian music. And then they ended up dancing with my kids. And it was so cool, though. My kids learned more English in those 6 weeks than they would have learned sitting in my classroom. Plus, they learned art. Plus, they are all signed up for they have scholarships to take art classes. And the opening had more people than they had ever had before. And I think that's what education is all about. That's what social and emotional learning is all about. When you partner with each other and you realize it's everybody's job to educate our future kids.
That's great. So, those are wonderful examples of an inclusive community that's coming together on behalf of every single student. Let's push on school leaders. I don't think personally that we've spent enough time thinking about school leaders in American education, their role, their importance. And I'm really, I've become convinced over time that they are the most, I know they and teachers, but are really critical to building out a social, emotional, and academic learning agenda. I'm going to ask both Sonia and John. I'll start with you, Sonia. How do you think about leadership development, and what ideas come to mind that can really help drive for leaders that deeply understand the social, emotional, and academic development of their students and their teachers?
Yeah, when I get to talk about this topic in particular, one of the things that I've really been focused on lately is that I think in education we screen for leadership behaviors or actions instead of screening for leadership values or character. And we miss it all the time. Every interview I've ever been in wants to know about how I frame instructional leadership. And they want to know that I understand data analysis, that I understand pedagogy, that I can backwards map. They want to know all of those things. What kind of feedback loops am I going to have? I can talk about that all day long, but that's not what makes or moves the engine in our organization. It's the fact that we value the dignity of every single human being in our building, and we as a leader, myself and my admin team, believe that it's our responsibility to help you build capacity in your craft. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And if I value you as a professional, and I believe that my role is to do that, then I want to figure out how I can do that best with you. And it's not about being brilliant around instructional design. It's about figuring out how do I coach and come alongside people in a way that what we say is receivable, where they trust us in their development, where they are open to feedback in those open conversations. It's huge. And when we are looking for leaders, we're almost always on this action side of things instead of on the who are you and what's the essence that you will bring into an organization such that you're going to be able to move these what we know to be best practices. And I think I spent a lot of time thinking about that there. In our building, on our administrative team, our goal is to build the capacity of individuals. And I say to my assistant principals all the time, we are in a situation where if our teachers are growing faster than you, that's an unsustainable system. You're responsible as a leader to be growing yourself in all of the competencies we're asking for our teachers to be growing in. Otherwise, one thing happens. A ceiling is created and our teachers either off board, right? They either go or you go. And I'm going to say as a leader, you've got to grow I have to grow so that people under me can grow. So this values versus actions or behaviors for us has been very, very central. I think the other thing that I wanted to say, and I heard it when what John was saying, is we've talked all morning about being visionary, setting a clear and compelling vision for teachers and for our organizations. I can't say enough. I think we get the clear pretty good in education. We all know vision statements. We can all state it, but we're not moving or pushing on leaders to be compelling. We don't get to just say something and everybody just says, yes, I will follow along. No, like what Ellen is saying is that we are in the people development program. We have an amazing opportunity to be shaping the next generation. That is compelling. And as leaders, we're responsible to put in front of our organization a compelling mission, not just something that is on paper and sounds pretty, but as a leader, we're responsible for that. And I think in our organization or in our field, we don't push on that enough. Leaders we don't get to take the back seat and not be inspirational or not be compelling. It's not okay. We need to actually put in front of people something they want to take a hold of on behalf of the kids that we serve. And so I think that's big in this work as well.
I'm going to begin by incredibly affirming the wisdom that Sonia said in 2 points in particular. One was the notion of we don't get to just announce, and this notion of compelling is incredibly important, but it's how one compels. And I think that the standalone way is by modeling the very action you're asking for others. And so living the very values-based structure that you want to inculcate in others and you want your organization to look and live like is the most important way. And to be unapologetic about that and unafraid about that, I think is important. Second thing I would say is I wholeheartedly agree about, yes, of course, you have to know how to lead and you actually have to understand organizational change and development. You have to understand how to support and all of the tactical components of that. But if you are not in a strong and aligned values-based set of how you live, I think that's what we test first. I mean, whether it was a district of 10 schools or Los Angeles over 1,000 schools, no principal ever got hired unless I got to meet that person. And I was not testing on how well they understood scaffolding in language arts. I was understanding their unshakable belief in the capacity of every single person and the values they have. My two comments, not affirming Sonia's, but adding to those is I have seen far more, we're talking about leadership, far more teacher leader than I have seen administrative leadership across all of the schools. And so I really want this set of comments to be much more broad than as we think about formal administration. There's tremendous amount of amazing teacher and staff leadership that I think goes untapped and unrecognized. That is part of this piece. And then the other thing I might say is, like, how do we do this? Well, with all due respect, I don't think we should be waiting for the academy and the university and teacher training programs to do this. I think they have to catch up to us. And I think a tremendous amount of this can be done in our own districts and in our own schools because there's not a strong strand of this in administrative development programs. And I think we can take the lead there in leadership development. And then just personally, I think, once again, I have watched principal development and principal academy, and it is so filled with the deliberateness of how to administer as opposed to how to lead. And I think that this work flips that on its head. If you actually want a school where a young man can walk in and not be seen as black, white, or brown, but to be seen as whole and with limitless capacity, then I think you want to lead in this type of area. You want to see a young gal walk in and not be seen as being limited by her family's income or what tribe in First Nation Native American that she is from, then you want to lead from this area. They want to be seen as whole, complete, and safe. And I think this is actually the way to do that. And I think that is what we should be doing our professional development with, not how to have the best bus schedule. Yes, it's important to have a safety bus schedule, like no doubt about that. But 4 or 5 hours of that, not so much.
Wow, I just want to keep going and keep going, all of us. It's so compelling. I think. Look, let me touch on a couple things. So really the difference between technicians and values and being in people. Like that's a big, like I can go read, I've never been a principal, but I could go read about bus schedules and budgets. I mean, I could use a little extra help on the side probably, but about how to lead and be and really drive change in an intentional way that's beyond an announcement, I think is really, really critical. So many other points that you both made, I could keep going on. I think, Leticia, do you want to make a comment on those? I know, I want to say one other thing.
Can I just say one more thing? Look, I just want to call up my own world, and that is incumbent upon superintendents to fund that, make space for that, and to give the policy place that this actually matters. So don't want to leave us out either, or us off the hook.
Totally, because you all in that district office are in service of all this happening, and if we don't have you and your leadership and guidance, like Shelley and you and others, I mean, Maria, we wouldn't be where we are today. I want to comment on something that John said, because I feel like I missed a beat too, actually, in this. Like, I'm really big on teacher leadership, instructional leadership roles that are, you know, that are career lattices and ladders for teachers. And so helping teachers build their capabilities around leading is also really an important point I didn't want to miss. Let me move on to another question, because I know that we're on a time schedule here. I want to talk to both Chris and Leticia about the teacher side of the equation, right? How do we ultimately engage teachers in this work? When you think about what you've learned over the years, you know, what do you wish maybe you'd have done at the beginning that you weren't able to do? And how do you think about really kind of driving a movement of teachers that's compelling? Leticia, let's start with you.
I think the first thing is, and the first panel touched on this, is that teachers, they come in and they just work themselves to death. They go in early and work all the way till 6 or 7. I still see some of especially my new teachers do that, and then they burn out, and that's why they, you know, drop out and stop teaching. And I feel like we really need to take care of ourselves, that social emotional part of ourselves, and modeling it for others. And I see students doing this too. You know, my seniors or even my freshmen start taking 2 AP classes when they're freshmen, and then they burn out and they don't have that balance. And we need to teach that. You know, on the airplane, they always say, you put the oxygen mask first on you, and then you can take care of others. That's exactly what we need to do as teachers. And my advice to new teachers is take care of yourselves. You're not going to be able to do a great job if you don't, and that social emotional need of yourself. So that's one of the first things. And then the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is even the first, and I wish I would have known this at the beginning, and now I do this, the first 2 weeks of school, I don't teach, you know, my film as literature and go right into it, or English as a second language and go right into it. What I do is those first 2 weeks, I really just work on getting to know my students and having that relationship. So the first 2 weeks is just about relationship and team building and collaborating, and it's, you know, really eye-opening. And also take some of my planning and go do home visits. And I encourage my teachers to do that too, that opens doors so much more for families, and they feel comfortable, and they're like, wow, a teacher's at my house. And you know what? They're the first parents there at the parent-teacher conferences, because then they feel comfortable with you. And especially a lot of my parents are nervous and scared to go to a school if they're first new to the country. But if you come to their house first, they're like, feel so like they belong. And you know, it's that partnership again. So I encourage my new teachers, my mentees, is to go do a home visit, you know? And I just think that those are all so important for helping everybody work together. Like I said, that partnership. And that's the advice I would give to new teachers, is take care of yourself.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I'll just add that whether you're dealing with new teachers to the profession or veteran teachers who might not have had the same teacher prep or training in regards to social and emotional learning, I think that what is key is that you help teachers understand that there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum that goes from explicit social and emotional learning instruction to an ideal, which is integration. And every place is at a different point in that spectrum. I'd say that my school is probably left to center. We're still closer to explicit, but our ideal is integration. And explicit, the thing about it is, if someone wants to go out right now and start doing this good work, you can say, all right, here are some explicit things you can do, you can teach, maybe in an advisory class or in an I-block at a lower level, that helps develop social and emotional learning skills and competencies. And it's concrete, it's tangible. And an educator is going to grab onto that because they can see it. Parents are going to grab onto that because they can see it and they're going to see the value of it. So you start there if you want it in a certain place. Some places might already have that. And so then you can talk about, like I mentioned before, looking at things you already do and looking at how things are already integrated and growing on that. At our school, I mentioned our Equate team, and we wrote a grant so we could go to Yale last year for a couple of days and get some training. And some of the deliverables on that grant were that we were going to do some explicit lessons in 9th grade advisories. And what we did immediately was the 8 of us, we did a survey of our faculty and said, who are 8 other people that are going to buy into this? And so we partnered up with people that didn't go to Yale. So we doubled our capacity by implementing these explicit lessons with people that were interested but maybe wanted to learn. And we made it a commitment, too, to collect data as we implemented the explicit lessons. Because our theory of action is this. If you have a concrete idea with data that supports it, you're going to build capacity. You're going to get buy-in. And so that's the approach we've taken, and it's moved us along that spectrum towards integration because now people are starting to think about what they already do. For example, we have an AP English literature teacher who is teaching Hamlet, who is looking at Mark Brackett's mood meter and saying, how is Hamlet feeling at different parts throughout that play? And if he could have a moment, like if he could do a redo, like what would you suggest to get him to a better place emotionally? And so, but and the students are responding, saying this is a really interesting way of looking at this piece of literature. Mm-hmm. So I think if you approach it that way, people don't view it as an add-on. And again, you have to be thoughtful and strategic as you move along the spectrum to integration. That is the goal. But starting with something that's concrete and tangible, we see more success, I think, in getting to that long-term goal.
Ellen, just a quick comment. I mean, one of the things I totally love is when I learned something that I had never considered before, and that occurred at the first panel for me at least one many times. But from our colleague, amazing leader in Cleveland, one of the things that had quite never dawned on me was what is typically in this country a process of conflict, and that is reaching a new collective bargaining agreement. The notion that this be placed in collective bargaining, or for those of us who don't work in districts like that, memorandums of understanding, was stunning both in its modeling of respect and collaboration and care for all the adults. And it really, quite frankly, if what we get paid and when we work and how we're treated when there's a conflict are important enough to be memorialized, this is absolutely even more important to be memorialized. And what a pretty amazing model, I think, for a community. So I was very struck by that, and I think it merits consideration as a best practice.
That's great. I'm smiling at Jillian back there because we heard about this, and many of us were together thinking about the sort of practice change agenda and how we think about it. And there's different opinions. Some people thought that was a great best practice, and some other people were questioning it. But I'll leave it to you to decide what you all think. But I guess what I really want to say is strong labor management relationships are really adult SEL, right? And that then is going to be followed by what principals and teachers and kids are doing in school. So I salute you and Eric Gordon for being able to get those kind of relationships going. I got the 5 minutes piece on this next thing looking at, so I want to push each of you. Like, one of the things that a small committee is going to do is come up with a set of recommendations. So here's your chance. You've got, John just sort of gave one recommendation maybe as to best practice, but let's one or two ideas that you have that in the practice change agenda that we should really not forget to include. We got to include it. So I'm going to start this time with you, Chris, then I'll go to Leticia, John, and finally I'll come to Sonia.
I wish we had more time because I have a number of recommendations, but I'm going to stick to just one that I think is critical. On the February 27th webinar where we talked about the interim report, I spoke of 7 T's, T as in teacher, those being time, talent, terrain, treasure, that's money, training, technology, and tone. And those are components, I think, that really lend themselves to recommendations. The one I think is most critical, and we've heard this today, was on talent. There has to be a focus on human capital, highly effective, high quality human capital when we're trying to move a SEED initiative forward. And so the movement, the talent, the initiative has to be moved like a top-down, bottom-up led initiative. So we heard John talk about the administrators having the vision, being able to talk about the importance of social emotional learning. Administrators have to maybe make it a priority, make it a district or school goal to integrate social emotional learning. They have to advocate for it with boards of education to get funding for it. They have to create opportunities for teachers to lead the movement from the bottom up, create distributive systems of teacher leadership so that the teachers can actually do the good work while they're still teaching. What does that look like? Teachers in the classroom who have time to write the grants to fund the initiatives, that have time to cross-train their peers, that have time to go out and learn. Teachers that maybe are able to interact with the community, go on home visits, and build the movement in the community. I think that if we have teacher leaders and administrators, high quality teacher leaders and administrators working together, we're going to improve outcomes for kids, certainly. We're going to better prepare them for life beyond school, in the workplace, in their families, and beyond. And we're going to allow them to live the lives they dream as they move on beyond our schools.
I love that.
Thank you so much, Chris. Leticia?
I have a couple of recommendations. One, I was on the airplane when I was coming with one of my colleagues from Aspen, and she's an executive director for a preschool, and she was telling me how much time and money they put in social and emotional learning at the preschool. Of course, kids are learning so much and like sponges when 0 to 5. But I feel like that we miss, because as we get older and older and older, there's not that bridge of social focus on social and emotional learning. So you get to elementary and it's a little bit less of time and money that we put into our, training our admin, our teachers, our educators. And then high school, there's not even, I think about just this year, we've been really focusing more on it. But before, we hardly had anything on social and emotional learning workshops at all. And a couple of days ago, I was at our local hot springs, and I was talking to a nurse, and she says every month they have training on social and emotional learning as a nurse. And I thought, oh my gosh, as a teacher, how much more important that is for us to have trainings. And they do it every month. And how much do we do it at our schools and our districts? And I just feel like we need to put more time and money. We put so much time and money into all this standardized testing and looking at all the data, which I'm saying that's really important. But I feel like if you don't have that social emotional foundation, the kids are not going to succeed academically. You have to have that. So I'd like to recommend is just doing that, especially at the higher level as you get higher, and higher. Also at 2 this morning, I woke up and I sat up and I thought about how critical this movement is right now. We had a suicide in our school a few months ago, and I thought about this young man who's 15 years old and took his life, and I thought about, what? We need to make more noise about this social and emotional movement right now. This is critical. You think about what happened in Florida, and I just feel like everyone listening and everyone that's here today is that we need to make more noise. We need to be louder. It's time. It's time to do that now. And so please get on our Aspen Institute website right now and tell us your recommendations, because we can't do it alone. We have to do it together. We're a force and we're powerful, but we need to do it now for our kids.
Thank you, Leticia. John?
Quickly build on the piece. I think that somehow along the line we've figured that this is something that takes best at preschool and early elementary. And quite frankly, this sitting inside of all of our worries about the development of executive function of our older and emerging youth, and the development of mindsets. Like if we want anything about what Carol Dweck talks about in terms of mindset developments, then this is exactly what's needed. As far as leadership piece, a couple of quick things. Just an unapologetic leadership for and through this issue, about the issues that are the thorniest, about racial disparity, socioeconomic disparity, gender disparity, belief sets around capacity. We tend to anchor those in things like evidence around discipline or evidence around capacity or evidence around tracking. Actually, I think it's just the opposite. I mean, I think if you want, and Lord knows I hope, a very strong social justice agenda, I think that doing it through this is much more likely to make that possible and real in schools. And then I think the role of administration, we could spend just a little bit less time talking about arming teachers for safety and a lot more time about providing teachers with the tool that will make for a more safe environment. I think we will get a hell of a lot better in terms of a school system for which then society can learn from us.
Great, and we will give Ellen the last word.
One more, but Sonia, and then I'll have the last word. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think I have to come back to what I've said before, which is I think we need to develop really explicit screeners that are looking for that values character side versus the action side. And then I think the second thing that I would be really explicit about is that we need to expect leaders to embed a practice process for teachers in this, that they are getting to actually activate these skills within themselves. And if you'll indulge me to tell a really quick story, because I was motivated by what you said about a suicide. In our community, we had a school shooting just outside, dismissal, 2 minutes after dismissal, about a month ago in my building. Hardest day for me as a principal ever, for a lot of different reasons. But I bring up this story for two reasons. One, our school, we've been there 6 years, and we were able on the Monday after this to come back and do community circles at every level, from our advisory groups to our grade level teams to the whole school, in the way that we were able to handle this, to our teacher team doing this, where there was this explicit, intensive community of care that responded to this and kind of recreated physical safety for us. But to what you were saying, what woke me up at night was the young man who had brought the weapon and who had committed the shooting after school. We'd only had him for 4 weeks. And we are really big on relationships in my building. And what we lost and what woke me up was he didn't know yet. He didn't know yet how much we loved and valued him, such that he would tell us that there was a threat. We get that all the time. My kids tell us all the time if there's a problem, and we're able to go get at it. But what woke me up was we'd only had him for 4 weeks. He had come into us off an expulsion in January, and he didn't know. He didn't know how safe he was, how loved he was, how cared for he was. And so for us, for myself as a leader, I was like, what do we need to do to ensure that every kid, no matter when they come into our doors, that we can accelerate the process by which they know that they're known and seen and cared for, such that he would have known, he can tell us, there's something that's supposed to go down after school and I need your help. And that happens to us all the time. But that's what woke us up, that intense focus on relationships at every level that drives this work and makes our kids know that they're loved and cared for and safe.
Mm.
Wow. Prior panel, this panel, 8 talented, amazing educators. I'll bring Shelley and myself into the mix. This is powerful, you guys. You've all come today, but there's no room for anyone just sitting. This is about a movement, and you're the movers. We're the movers. Like, we're collectively the movers to transform and reimagine, as Maria said, public education, to ensure that every child, no matter their zip code, gets the social, emotional, and academic development that's the foundation of public education. And I am leaving here today inspired and reinvigorated because this is why I became a teacher. And I'm 100% sure this is why all 10 of us became teachers. Not to just fill in bubbles, be accountable, and prescribe what everyone should be doing all the time, but to build a community, a collective of humans who care about each other at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level, and up and down and across. Top down, bottom up, integrated, woven, all learning together, the same set of messages, the same approach. If we could just be rowing the boats together, the same direction, we could transform education for every single child in this country. And I want to really thank the panel. It's been invigorating to work with each of you and just to listen to you today and over the last several months. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have time for a few questions from our audience. Those of you who would like to ask questions of the panel around the critical practice changes. Do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am. And please introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Bernadine Futrell, AASA, the School Superintendents Association. Thank you all for this panel, and thank you all for everyone that's a part of this work. So we look at kind of the leader, the role of the school district leader in terms of bridging the community and supporting. So I obviously agree with everything you guys have shared today. I wanted to ask a little bit about, and I think, John, you mentioned kind of the pushing forward a social justice agenda and looking at SEL as a lever as we work towards equity around students and we look at the social political climate that we're currently in. If you guys have any recommendations or thoughts that school district leaders can use so that they can scale some of the things that are happening in the district out towards the community and the community that it's kind of bringing in some of those challenges that we see around the social political front. Thank you.
So I think that's incredibly important to do. I think a lot of times, both myself in my past and where I grew from that and watching lots of leaders across the country, we stand up and we declare what is wrong. We talk about a school-to-prison pipeline. We talk about the fact that students go home to trauma-filled communities and trauma-filled homes, and we talk about unsafety, and we talk about the failure of society to provide even a modicum of a safety net, which is getting worse in this country. I get to say that because I'm on the panel. But we oftentimes stop there. And so I think the opportunity is to talk about this first and then describe those very, very unsatisfactory conditions of community and how they could be different, I think is a huge help. It's really difficult to sit in with the business community and say, well, what do you want me to do? Yep, those are bad things. This is the way we live now. What would you like me to do about that? Whereas there is actually a very clear way that it could be quite different if we're mindful about this. Like we've talked to you for years about why it's important to learn to compute and to learn to be literate. It's equally, if not more important, to understand that the development of those skills are based upon the foundation of social and emotional and academic development. And we can all play a role in that. I don't really think that like the whole mentoring stuff makes any sense unless actually this becomes part of the mentor training. Not just how to kneel down and ask the right question at a little elementary desk versus a high school desk. Yeah, we teach them that kind of stuff. And why do I put so much emphasis on teaching about that? Because we have to make public sense as leaders of this work for the community to actually digest it. Otherwise, it's like, what are they talking about this time? And I think that is one thing I would suggest. And then the second thing is your organization echoing this is huge partnership and help. I mean, very strong organization, and I was a member of it. But when you have as many people saying yes and, I think that makes a big deal, especially for emerging leaders.
Great. Do we have another question? I thought I saw a hand over here.
lunchtime.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to give you an opportunity, Ellen, if you wanted to respond to that question as well.
You know, I was thinking about something when you were asking it, and I'm trying to make a connection to the work we do. So, you know, the New Teacher Center, we're working with school districts to build capacity in the district of teachers and school leaders to drive for better induction and onboarding and support for brand new teachers so that they can get on the path to excellence early. And people are always impressed with how we've scaled, right? We're in like 550 districts, we're in 35,000 teachers' classrooms, the mentors from those districts are. And I've watched us make some mistakes along the way, and I want to share it because it's really in line with your question and in John's response. You always have to start from the beginning. You know, the more sophisticated we get, we think, oh, we can begin there. And we start at this very sophisticated level and we leave everybody behind. But I think you have to start at the beginning with people where they are and make sure that it's explicit learning so that they then own the work. A lot of things that scale, I think sometimes unfortunately scale by a template where people just see the what, they don't understand the why behind it or the how. So I think what I want to really say is that the why of the work we're talking about and the how is the essence of our beings. And that has to be talked about and translated and not seen as soft and mushy, but as rigorous and academic and access and caring and love.
I don't want to go next. We are here at the Aspen Institute, the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. Please follow us on Twitter at Aspen Institute or at Aspen SEAD, hashtag SEAD. For those of you who are watching us live stream, we encourage you to still send in your questions through social media, and we will absolutely be responding to those throughout the day. I want to thank our two panels again for being with us. But as we know, we don't really end a school day. I feel like I've got to do my extra part because we have like outstanding principals and teachers with us. But you don't end the school day without a checkout, right? It's the opportunity to do exactly what Ellen said. Just sort of start at the beginning, make sure that what we were trying to do, we ended up where we wanted to be. And if there are any questions along the way, we give people a chance to do that. So we are going to spend the last bit of our time together. I'm giving you an opportunity to do the reimagining, to think about where you sit in this work, whether you're here with us today or out in cyberspace. We want you to participate, and it's an opportunity for you to reimagine where you are, what is happening in your space with children and their families and the community around social, emotional, and academic development, and to spend a little time reflecting on what might be different given what you've learned here today. One, the 5 core statements around the practice base for how we learn, and then also the implications related to that. So I need everyone to stand up again, and you're going to, our panelists are welcome to join us too. You're gonna go around the room and high five 5 people, thank them for being here today, and stop on your 5th person. Go.
I got my 5 people right here. John?
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks.
Nice going.
You really need to do that.
Thank you.
Maria? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoyable.
I love your
Okay,
area.
stay with your partner, and you're gonna stand next to your 5th person back to back. Stand with your person back to back. You're going to do back to back. That would be this part of your body. Back to back. I love you guys, the panelists, but we're still in the middle of the event. Can you find a pair partner? And it's not going to be me. You got to find somebody else. Somebody, go find a little partner. Yeah, go find a little partner. Okay, thank you. I love the researchers. He's from the other commission. All right. Okay. So everyone's back to back, and this is called Think, Pair, Share. I think you've probably done all these before, but I'm having you stand back to back because I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I don't want you to, kind of tip because I need you to get in the zone. We started today with releasing and receiving, and we're going to talk about reimagining. Learning by its very nature is both social and emotional. Creating the right conditions for learning brings dramatic benefits for students, staffs, parents, and our community. A caring school community intentionally generates opportunities for students to develop the competencies they require to be successful in school, work, and life. It also offers all of us a vision and a model of the way the world could be. We want it to be for all students. We believe it starts with the adults, that leadership is central. It is explicit and embedded. And our schools have to partner with our communities. It's time for you to reimagine. When I think about my personal journey, I think about some of the big rethinks I've done as a superintendent in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Austin, Texas, and now in Atlanta, Georgia. I remember rethinking in Austin that we needed to move away from high stakes testing to a whole child agenda. I remember going to St. Paul and realizing that without an ethnic majority in the district, you have to have strategies that are for all children. We rethought in Atlanta, safety and security, where now we have officially exited our district from disproportionality status of the overexpansion of African American students with disabilities. And you heard today on our last panel that we have to rethink our role as adults in particular so that the issues of social justice and civic engagement can be inspiring a place for real change, not just in our classrooms, in our schools, in our hallways, in our playgrounds, but for our country and the world. We're going to be silent, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to think about and reimagine what you would like to see changed in education. Thinking about those 5 core statements and then the implications of what that would mean to change our practice tomorrow. Drop your arms to your sides, 6 inches from your legs. Turn your hands out. Start reaching higher as you inhale. As you exhale, prepare to receive the thinking of your partner. Open your eyes, turn and face your partner, and you are going to listen. One is going to be A, the other is going to be B, and we're going to let them talk for 2 minutes, and you're going to receive what they're saying and how they'd like to reimagine education with social, emotional, and academic development. Partner A, begin.
Grace is going to be A.
as well as leadership, but I think we can do more from both thing with the students and so I'm just trying to like figure out how to instill. We want to make our classroom a safe space and also collaborate with communities
We don't use you can actually an organizational sense for the city. And so when I was growing up, I just think about individuals calling about better, and I really do think that's what happens. I don't really think that's what we want to be who we should be.
Happy to talk. So I'm not surprised.
We are compelled by our
He does a good job of collaborating with really make it work.
And that you kind of bring in after you're in attitude in this position and you kind of lose track of over time the way parents don't scare and just to kind of full empathy because it's not really figuring out something you think is funny, but it's really that's more than
maybe the last thing I would say is
that's what I've been
What else? It's time for you to stop talking. And I want to give your partner B an opportunity to ask you a couple of clarifying questions. Not to be answered right now, but to help push you in your reimagination. So, partner B, you have 1 minute to give them your reflections and some questions. You may begin.
Some of the things that
Thank you. Now, partner B has an opportunity to share their big rethink. For 2 minutes, you are listening, not talking. You're receiving what they're saying so that they can have, you can have the opportunity to ask questions in a moment. But please listen carefully and be respectful of their thoughts. You may begin.
the truth is just
You weren't listening to me.
We have to like start
what they're saying and how they actually matters more than you realize.
But the lesson on I realized that like the community that I was in,
Most teachers respect what kids know.
So when I'm doing
When they hear what students think about them, it's kind of anonymous and safe. It would kind of open their eyes if they understood a little bit more what parents hear the kids say about their teachers. It might open their eyes a little bit more because you see their
how to make it work. I have to admit, I have technical
Instead of yelling. Well, you know, that would be like,
can't come up or something.
that could be like not emotional intelligence. Yelling.
And I'm like, oh no.
So it's quiet back.
It's so
But no, I'm talking about all the.
But it's so and you're forgetting all those skills. I just see it happens. You know, even in class, I don't know if you have trouble with this. All our teachers do is the kids with their phones in class. You know, do you guys have trouble with that at your school?
Thank you. Now, partner A has an opportunity to ask you questions and to push your reimagination thinking. You don't say anything. You listen to the questions. You may begin.
Like I feel like a policymaker backwards. How do we know how this it is? Like to be careful instead of listening. And yeah, the idea that especially in areas where there's not enough somebody what are kids I take their phone, I go, this is a teacher.
You know, and I think some teachers have like they're designed for shoes, and then number up, drop it, and then you know I have a basket. When it gets really bad, I just pass the basket around positively.
Thank you. Okay, this exercise is called Think, Pair, Share for a reason, right? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But now we're going to add a little pop because I think what I heard Ellen say and others, like the time is now. We need to kind of get moving. Who has a reimagination scenario that they'd like to share? You can volunteer your other partner if you thought they had a great idea. Okay, I have someone in the back. Here we go. Samantha, welcome.
So I'm with the Aspen Institute. I partially work with the Youth Commission, so I was largely today thinking about how this pertains to their work and when they are on the stage presenting their thoughts and their call to action, how is this relevant to them? So one of the things I thought about is within that bucket of leadership and within that theme of agency, how do we get students involved in shaping this? Do we get them in the room in faculty meetings? Do we get them in positions on the school board? Do we give them an advisory commission? How do we give them leadership and input into this ongoing so that they're giving input in the beginning and then giving feedback from the student perspective?
Thank you. Thank you. Give her some snaps. Snaps, good job. Anyone else? I need one more. Okay.
Well, Chris and I were talking, I was thinking about instead of arming our teachers with guns, we should arm them with social and emotional professional training.
We only have a few seconds left, but if there's another burning reimagination, I will accept it. Yes. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. My name is Sarah. I'm from Outward Bound School in Baltimore, and I was talking with Dan, who is for the After School Alliance, and so it was an interesting pairing where he and I are both essentially out-of-school time providers for these types of services, and we both agreed that we enjoy coming to these types of events to say, thank you, everyone, for seeing, right? You know, because you've been doing this for a long time, you have intuitively known that this was the right way to be behaving in your schools. It's something that we intuitively know and work with as well. So how can we continue to be talking the same language? How can we continue to provide the service that your school is needing? How can I understand what it is you're looking for and walk in and ask the right questions to make sure that I am providing the service that you need externally?
All right. Everyone can have a seat. I think we all agree that providing access to a quality education is much bigger than it has been defined in the past, that we all have our own sense of
social justice and civic responsibility to push the conversation about education. I know that academic skills are critical, right? We want kids to graduate on time, be able to go on into a college of their choice. We want them to have career skills so that they can be competitive in a rapidly evolving, ever flat economy that is more global every day. But it's around the decision-making skills, the idea that social and emotional learning coupled with the smarts give them the heart to be better people than we ever were. And the vision that's articulated by the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, we believe is achievable, and that there is a sense of urgency that is much needed. All of you are coming from different roles and backgrounds, geographic locations, and that your communities have very diverse demographics. But we know that the practices that have been outlined, what we've been talking about today, what this report is all about, is to help us push, along with the Council of Distinguished Scientists, the idea that when we integrate social emotional learning with academics, that our kids will actually be more successful as young people, but also in whatever they choose to do. We agree that the time is now, that it needs to be accelerated, and that this work needs to be at the forefront of what's happening in education today. I am the superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools. I'm incredibly grateful for all of the thought partnership that has happened thus far. But I will close in the words of Martin Luther King. The time is always right to do what is right. And we know that social emotional learning and academic development is right for our children. And I thank you all who are watching, who are here today, for being part of this effort. Thank you so much to the Aspen Institute and the National Commission on Social and Emotional and Academic Development for making this possible today. Thank you.
Chris, thank you.